to be very clear for history. I am not knocking Dr. King, but I am knocking a narrative that features and uplifts and archives the leadership of one person over the leaderful movement of regular people that change the actual world.
That's right.
Right? And that value of collectivity is seen there. And the threat of that to dominant society is seen in the way the history is then taught to us. Oh no, it's about this special person. Oh, I'm not special. I can't do that. As opposed to, it was about regular people sitting in circles having conversations and making decisions about what to do the next day and what not to do the next day and who's coming with me.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ronnie Pinoy, Director of Artistic Programming here at Emerson College. So as we begin, I want to ground us in a longer history that for Black communities, stories and songs have never just been forms of expression. They've been ways of surviving, remembering, organizing, and imagining freedom. So long before these traditions were ever documented, they lived in oral storytelling, in communal song, in call and response, forms brought through African diasporic traditions and carried forward under the conditions of slavery. In spaces where people were denied access to literacy, authorship, and/or official records, stories and songs became a way to hold knowledge, to share truth, and to build collective identity. So whether in the hush arbors where spirituals were sung in secret, in folk tales that were passed from generation to generation, or later in the freedom songs of the civil rights movement, these practices didn't just reflect struggle, but they made movement possible. They brought people together, gave language to what was happening, and helped sustain courage in the face of it. So as we continue to see that lineage today in theater, in spoken word, in music that moves between the stage and the streets, some of which hopefully is here, these forms evolve, but their core functions remain. They carry memory, they challenge erasure, they mobilize people, and they help us imagine something beyond the world as it is. So this conversation is also part of a broader moment. Which I've been giving a lot of thought to. So as we approach the 250th anniversary of the United States, there are many ways to tell the story of this country, but we know that the official narratives are incomplete. So part of what we're doing here tonight is asking whose stories have been centered and whose have been left out. And how have communities, particularly Black communities, used storytelling and song to record histories that were never fully acknowledged and to imagine freedoms that have not yet been realized? And to me, this is very personal for me as an Indigenous woman. I'm Laguna Pueblo and Cherokee. And I really think very much about our shared histories of erasure and resilience, the ways in which Indigenous and Black communities have been historically pitted against each other, have had real moments of shared solidarity and also tension. And I think it's critical, especially now, to build relationships across communities. So in my own work, I spend a lot of time reflecting on how Black and Indigenous cultural practices and Afro-Indigenous cultural practices hold deep commitments to memory, to story, to land, and to collective care, and how these connections invite us into more reciprocal and accountable ways of working together, and also of stewarding this beautiful world that we're a part of. So I'm really grateful to be in dialogue with these incredible panelists tonight. I'm so glad they said yes, and I'm also shocked that they aren't already just all working together all the time already, because I just think the world of all three of them. And I can't wait to explore how stories and songs continue to shape not only our past, but how we move forward towards more just and liberated futures. And to help us explore this idea, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce these three incredible panelists we have with us. So first, farthest away from me, Lizzy Cooper Davis is an artist and scholar whose work explores how the arts can facilitate community dialogue, resistance, and social change, particularly within Black freedom movements. She has collaborated with organizations and artists, so many, including Urban Bush Women, the American Repertory Theater, and Arts Emerson, very beloved at Arts Emerson, and has led projects ranging from community-based performance to anti-racist cultural organizing. And that takes us to Asia Burrowwood, in the middle here, is the managing director of Berkeley's Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. Love it. Where she oversees programs, curriculum, and initiatives advancing equity in music. An ethnomusicologist, educator, and curator, Asia's work explores the intersections of race, gender, and performance across traditions, including jazz, hip hop, and the broader African diaspora. And immediately to my right, the one and only Bea Jimenez, who is an urban planner, cultural weaver, and community strategist, and I don't know, fabulous human being, whose work centers cultural memory, equity, and collective power. Yes. She has advised a range of civic and community initiatives, including the City of Boston's Rent Stabilization Advisory Committee, and has been recognized for her leadership in advancing community well-being and belonging. So let's dive in. Okay. So, and of course, panelists, before you first speak, if you could kindly identify yourself by your name and provide a short visual description of yourself. I failed at that. Here's my short description. I got a new haircut, so I have short, getting used to it, short shoulder length hair with a swoop and a blue and brown patterned dress and brown boots, still with lots of freckles and hopefully a big smile. So that's me, Ronnie. And so I have a question for all three of you that I think I'd love for you to answer. Maybe we'll just go right on down the line if that's all right. So how does storytelling or music show up in your work or creative practice? And where do you see it intersect most clearly with what you do?
I love that. Thank you so much, Ronnie. You're so good at this. Thank you.
I just love you all.
Thank you, Arts Emerson. Thank you to the GBH Forum Network. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Biasmin Jimenez, and visual description, I'm wearing some box braids, a very bright red lippy from the Lip Bar, which is a Black-owned lip company. I'm wearing some fabulous white pants that I love. I think I was wearing them the last time I saw you. And this like very cute kaftan that I bought in South Africa when I went. So I look very cute, y'all.
Yeah.
So how does storytelling show up in the work that I do? I think that my work tries as much as possible to weave connection. And so in order to do that, we have to listen to each other and we have to listen to the places that we've been. We have to listen to the experiences that have made who we are, right? And so I started this series connecting with our ancestral lineages after traveling and finding people. And I was in conversation even just this week because I returned from one of my favorite countries, which is Colombia. And I was telling my friends, I was like, when I'm walking the streets of Cartagena or Medellin, I see Roxbury, I see Dorchester, and it's just us in a different place. And so storytelling for me is always about bringing people together and the things that have created threads of opportunity across them, across time, across music, like we'll talk through tonight, and across food especially. That's probably my favorite part.
Yeah, Asia.
Hi. Asia, she, her, and my descriptor is I am an African American woman of a beautiful chocolate hue. And yes. and today, I'm wearing my hair slightly pulled back. It's curly. I'm in a yellow, vibrant yellow and black dress, print dress with a black blazer and one of my favorite sandalwood black necklaces. Yes. So, as I said, all the things. Yes, I did. So, listen, I'm an ethnomusicologist, and I'm an ethnomusicologist, with my primary interest in Black music in the African diaspora. Specifically, I do look more here in stateside in the Americas in terms of how identity and community is formed through and how music reflects that. And I do believe that music, and I approach music as ethnomusicologists do, as a cultural process, right? It's something that is happening all the time. Music influencing culture, culture influencing music simultaneously all the time. We are ever in that process. I understand Black music as a continuum that is always connecting the past, present, and reaching towards the future, also simultaneously. And as music as a social process, as a cultural process, and this is not only for Black music, this is music across the world and cultures across the world. It is, I believe, the stories, the history, the DNA even, it will be in the music before it is even in a history book. It's there, right? We just have to have the ears to listen for it. So there's virtually nothing I do that does on a daily basis, including being the managing director of the Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, which is founded by Terry Lynn Carrington. Um, yes, absolutely. That does not involve music, obviously, but also the storytelling aspect. Because I think sometimes even when we say the word storytelling, which is important and culturally important in many cultures, but it's we're talking about African diasporic cultures, but it also is us documenting, right? And documenting, archiving, making sure that our wisdom, that our intelligence, that our genius, that our invention is carried on, and also for survival from generation to generation. And I'll say lastly that in Small's book, Christopher Small's book, and he talks in some of his work, he talks about musicking, right, and musicking as a verb. He's a music scholar, and he discusses the fact that music is a way that we tell ourselves stories about ourselves. And I think that is true for art in general. But we are constant, this is a human activity, this is a cultural activity, and it might vary differently between different cultures, but we're doing it, and certainly we do it in Black music community and traditions. And so I think then the questions or the prompts I think about any given time is, what stories are we telling about ourselves and about our history, and what stories are we creating right now to be told in the future?
Love that. Lizzy, talk to us.
Hey, hey, everybody. It's so nice to see you all. There's been so much love already. Snaps for the outfits, for the title, for the everything. I'm feeling it. Lizzy Cooper Davis, she, her. I'm a Black woman with a short curly fro and chunky glasses. I pretty much always have a scarf on, regardless of temperature or weather, because I get cold and it makes me feel good. So I have a red plaid scarf on, a black
It's a vibe.
top. What's that?
It's a vibe.
Okay, great. I'm glad. Yeah, some jeans and some sneakers that my daughter also has, so they make me happy. um, how does storytelling and music show up in my work? I mean, storytelling and music and arts and culture is the entirety of my work and has been for a long time. I was a theater kid really from out the womb. Was acting and performing and dancing from a very young age, and was a theater major in college and a professional actor based in New York for a little over a decade, and got to a point where I was more interested in exploring what art can do in society and in community than in showcasing something that I created and completed to offer for pay. Right? So I became less interested in sort of art as commodity and more interested in art as something that human beings across time and space have always done. Why? how, where, what is it doing for us and through us and to us? And that kind of shifted my path a good bit into doctoral work. I wouldn't say exactly similar to yours, but sort of cousin work to yours. We're in the same family of research in terms
It's
of
collective.
yeah, and my interest was in the role of arts and culture in Black freedom movements, whether that's through cultural organizers specifically collaborating to serve movements, or whether it's how are our daily practices of creating and making culture together part of resistance movements, part of visioning. And my work here at Emerson is in teaching and running a graduate program in applied practice, I would say, which is about supporting practitioners, creative artistic practitioners, to think about all of these questions, right? How can we use our assets as artists to support community building, dialogue, justice, joy, all of the things? One of my idols, I don't use that word lightly, but the late, great Dr. Bernice Johnson Regan, who was the founder of Sweet Honey and the Rock, which resonates with a lot of people, was a freedom singer in the civil rights movement, and great scholar of all that we're talking about. And she said, of the music of the civil rights movement in particular, but I think it applies in other contexts, the music was like an instrument, like holding a tool in your hand. And I'm really interested in that. What is that tool? What can it do? How do we pick it up? Yeah, I think that's what I want to say for now.
Ooh, okay, this was a powerful start to this conversation. Yes. Well, and I want to pick up this thread of there's so much that has been talked about here about the richness of music and storytelling in telling ourselves who we are. Music in doing that storytelling. What is the impact of all of this work, and even how do things such as our like our food and our ancestral practices show up in our lives, right? And for me, what's so interesting is the intersection of all of that with what we think of as formal history, formal practice, right? So oral storytelling, spirituals, early Black folk tales, everything I think that we're talking about so far, often emerged in contexts where people were excluded from these formal kind of systems of record, right? So, and yet they're what carried history, carried culture, carried the kind of DNA of who we are forward, right? So I'm curious what you think. What do you think that stories and songs were able to preserve or express that the formal history could not? And I'm putting it in air quotes because I imagine where we're going to go with that question.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Kind of kicked us off when we heard it, that some of it has been a little bit overplayed, right? That Africans in particular didn't write things down, that it was only oral and so on. And although a lot of that history is real, I think that we know that songs and memory really did live on through various means. Now, it really is a question of what do we value? Do we value more of the written word or the visual than the oral storytelling that we know came from indigenous practice, from African practice? And then that's a question that we can ask ourselves, like, what are we valuing over other forms of storytelling? And I think one of the key ways that oral storytelling, if we were to uplift it as a medium, is that it was also invited in as part of the way to keep intergenerational threads alive, right? And so storytelling was part of child rearing, right? It was the way that you understood the names of the family members that carried your history. And I think that what was lost for African Americans in this country is that thread, right? And so as an Afro-Caribbean woman myself, the way that that history impacted me and my family is that a lot of those records were lost, right? And now there's so many of us within my generation that are kind of knocking on the doors and saying, how do I retrieve some of this history and maybe fill in the blank or find new ways to tell these stories from the understanding that I have and from the position that I'm in. And so that's something that I want to call in that oral storytelling is a very beautiful tradition and definitely was not the only medium.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
I two things. I think that glad that you use the scarecrows or the rabbit ears or whatever you want to, however you want to talk about it, and using the word formal, right? Because even in the word formal, there's an inherent implicit bias, and just want to note we are here, in the United States, and our systems are, including education systems, are very much informed by Western European culture, this is a part of where that privileging of written over oral comes from, and as also as framing cultures that value oral traditions and oral histories, and framing that as less than, right, as means to justify, right, oppressive systems and such and so forth. So even in saying something is formal, like we have to think about when we're using that, like formal education versus what do we mean by that? Or formal language, even though language is fluid in all times. Nobody's speaking, King James or Shakespearean English, not even in England today. So it's a fluid thing that it changes. So I want to push back on that, because this is how we, cast these very important and valuable cultural traditions and traditions of survival and resistance, as well as identity affirmation as well, an affirmation of ourselves in that. I think too, I think a lot about continuity and change, and also going back to the idea of Black music as a continuum. And I think there also is an idea sometimes that that there are these types of cultural losses in African American culture that actually is not truly the story. No pun intended, at all. It's what has changed, what has continued, how are things adapted. For example, I don't know if anyone has ever seen. It's an older documentary, the language you cry in. Yeah, yes, and. In this documentary, you actually have there's a linguist, there's a ethnomusicologist, or music scholar, and maybe was it an anthropologist or a historian? But there's three types of different academics. Also, one being connected to this culture, a culture that I have lineage in through my grandmother, the Gullah Geechee culture down off of the Georgia Sea Islands. Or Carolinas, right? Absolutely. And why one of these cultures in African American culture is so distinctive is also the ways that some of the traditions, spiritual practices, and more were preserved. And there was a tune that a woman knew, and that came to her through her family and through her lineage. And I'm now forgetting some of the details, but I very much recommend this documentary. And a linguist recognized, I believe it was the Monday language, and a bit of used, just a few lyrics, not all of them, but recognized that. Anyway, they investigated it. Long story short, they eventually traveled to Sierra Leone to find if anybody could still recognize this tune. And it took them a while, but eventually they did. And it was also this woman who kept the song, that the song actually was connected to mourning practices and funeral practices. And the woman was given this tune specifically by her grandmother, one, because this is our practices, this is what we do. But also, if anybody, she states that her grandmother told her, if anybody has this tune, if anyone sings this tune and you hear this tune, you will know that they are your people. So and imagine that there hadn't been much connection between these West African communities and these communities here in the United States. Not much, but but this is the lineage. And so we have this idea of things that have been lost when they have been carried on the entire time. Also, I would recommend High on the, what is it, High on the Hog? Similar to food. So when you are down in New Orleans and you are, and I hope you are enjoying jambalaya, and for example, there is a connection to jollof rice, right? Coming at, so it might look different. It might have adapted differently. I can also talk about, for example, blues fiddling traditions that connect to gourd fiddling traditions out of West Africa as well. And so there's so much of that, and that's over the entire diaspora, right? It might look different from place to place throughout the Americas. However, people have found a way, right, to carry that on and pass that on, and music is one of those vehicles for that, and carrying that over through generations, especially when there was obviously active erasure, active oppression. So it's actually, to me, miraculous and brilliant that we found ways to honor and affirm ourselves and carry on regardless of, and still create and bring forth even new traditions as well, such as jazz, hip hop, and more.
That's incredibly powerful, and I love the framing that, like, to me, this is just as much American history as
Absolutely.
a history book that you're reading. I mean, this you can see the line, and this is I mean, it just connects so deeply to my hope in the way that we in this country are looking at this 250th anniversary, that not only that we're really thinking about not just adding additional histories, but how are we restoring, how are we rewriting
Yes.
what we think of as the dominant narrative, and how is this part of that? Because it's so powerful, and it's told in music, in language, in bodily expression, in the stories that we tell that actually map onto specific places and recipes for how to care for land, and so it's just,
Yes.
I love that. Over to you, Lizzy.
Agreed, all down the line. Yes, absolutely. And it makes me want to, rub my heart and think about practices and songs passed down in my own family and, all of that. But I fully agree that these cultural practices are containers of history and survival. And the only way we survive is by preserving knowledge of who we are because of where we've come from and where we want to go, right? And so this question of it's really an invitation to all of us to think about, well, what is history?
What is
Do you know what I mean? Like, well, wait a minute. What is important?
Right.
How are we constructing and defining history? Is it what I learned in high school? Maybe. I mean, some of us maybe went to some pretty dope high schools. I don't know. Is it what I learned? I don't know. Where are we getting the education that is not just giving us an archive of things that happened in the past that somebody decided to collect and say is important and memorialize, right? But how are we preserving and passing on and like metabolizing the information that led us to become who we are, so we know who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. There's this concept in performance studies, the idea of the archive of documented and recorded text, the archive that upon which formal history. I haven't heard rabbit ears before. I like that, right? But the archive upon which formal history is built, right? Books, documents that you could find in an archive in a library, statues, right? Memorial plaques, those kinds of things have historically, right? Have traditionally been the ways that we are told history is preserved. Important history. is preserved, right? So in performance studies, there's this idea, okay, there's the archive, but then there's the repertoire. There's the stuff we do. There's the way we make our lives and our loves and our families and ourselves and our future and our visions and remember through song, through recipe, through the way you rock your baby at bedtime. Do you know what I'm saying? Through the way you make a shirt for someone you love, or whatever the case may be, right? And so the invitation of performance studies and musicology and all kinds of fields, avenues of studying who we are, where we've been, and where we go.
Right.
To be really academic about it. How do we study who we are, where we've been, and where we go? Right? Is to ask this question: what is history? What is it for? And therefore, what is important about it?
who is it for?
And who is it for? Right? And for those of us for whom our relationship to the archive has been in a ledger as property, we're suspect of the archive. You hear what I'm saying? The archive knows us in a particular kind of way, contains and holds us in a particular kind of way, right? So maybe that's not where my history is at, but this song from my grandmother or whomever, that
Right.
may be where my history is at, and there's a
Right.
radical proposal in that.
And I was the same too, and been there all along because I'm thinking too as you're talking about like in questioning history, right? And because there is history, there is like just what happened, like just what happened earlier today, what happened yesterday, and then there's a telling of history, right? The historiography, right? So when you're looking at that, there's history, but then there's also how history has been told. And that's also an interesting thing to consider, right? Because you're not just looking at what happened, you're looking at how it's been told and who it's been told, which that's its own story too, because you at least also get to see what a particular mindset was maybe of dominant culture at any particular time, what an account from this perspective versus that perspective, right? Because what if, and there are actually, accounts of American history from the perspective of indigenous people. That is a different history. That is a different, if we're going to talk about in books or what have you, that's going to be a different book than probably the history books that we probably read and used in your formal education, for example, right? And that then that becomes a part of history too, also for us to look at. It's so layered.
Yeah, and what I love about everything I'm hearing so far is there's this invitation to think about history as maybe like to offer like one possible definition that I'm hearing from this is an invitation to inquiry. That history is constantly asking that question, like both about like ourselves and where have we been and where have those around us been. And I mean, I was so moved, Bea, by what you said about connecting to where where the line has been interrupted, right? I mean, I know that a big part of the work that myself and other Indigenous folks do is about about finding those ties that have been broken, either from boarding schools or from just forced assimilation, right? And in the instance of for so many African Americans, it's this hard tear in the kind of cultural fabric, right? But there's been so much work and so much love and care in everything we're talking about to still keep reweaving that connection. So I love this notion of history as of course it's not static, it's always being rewritten, but this like the kind of joyful inquiry you're all bringing to it just feels like there's just something so juicy there. And I'll kind of thread in another question, which is, there's so much of what we're talking about is not a kind of is a collective practice rather than an individual practice, right? So examples: call and response, communal singing, improvisation in jazz. Meaning is created collectively. And, there are also places, it's also practice that's moved between the church and the street and the stage. So I'm curious, where is why collective, and why is that so effective at bringing people together and sustaining movements? The collective nature and the across place in its practice. I'm fusing two
I love this
questions.
movement that you're
Yeah.
doing with your hands. Because it
Talk
is a
expressively.
collective, and I'll talk a bit about my series. So connecting with our ancestral lineages, it was about honoring. And so when we want to honor our ancestors and the lineages that we come from and the threads that connect us, then we want to do it in collective. Like we want to do it in a joyful, beautiful way, right? I'm looking across the room at Ife Franklin, who was a ceremonialist that I got to work with. And so much of the work and the friendship that I learned in my project with Ife was that honoring is a beautiful act of resistance, and there is so much lived history right here in our own backyard. And so one of the beautiful, beautiful ceremonies that we were able to work on together included going to the Dorchester North burial grounds, where these three enslaved folks were actually found through a project that Harvard was able to locate. And so we asked questions like, first of all, who knows about this, and do folks know about this? And as soon as I connected with Ife, they were like, of course they know. The community knows. They've been going and bringing flowers, and we've done our own celebration around these lives that lived here. And so I was like, of course, like, of course there have been people paying attention to this. And how else do we continue to honor their lives? And we were able to do this really beautiful gathering with the restaurant partner Comfort Kitchen. And it was just another way to say, right here in our own backyard, here in Boston, in one of our most beloved neighborhoods, Dorchester, is history literally playing out, right? It's not that far away. And we can also be part of it if we decide to remember, if we decide that this history is actually important. So it was a really beautiful reminder of, one, how simple it can be to honor our stories, and also what happens when we do it collectively, because I do think that the collective part is, for me, the most important part, because it allows me an opportunity to not only reflect on my lineage and the stories that I carry, but then it gives me an opportunity to learn about yours. And oftentimes there are so much that connects us, regardless of race, gender, ability, and orientation. There's probably something that we have in common, and that alone allows us to connect on a deeper level. It makes me more curious as a person, and hopefully it allows me to then find other connecting threads that we can work on together.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Jump in, team.
I think what comes to mind when I'm thinking about the idea of collectivity, and it's within the African diaspora. I mean, these are cultures that have a value for community and collective work, and versus more of a individualistic type of worldview. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but I think there's cultural values there that already that were already embedded, and so I think we move that way in general, right? I think from community standpoints, from working together, collective, sharing of resources, ideas. I think about when we think about, for example, Negro spirituals, and you are going to be hard pressed to find, okay, this person wrote this spiritual, right? In the in the way that this is the way also, I mean, this is the way that more like Western art music works. This is the way that our industry works. This is also how the whole economic structure works. Who wrote that song, or whether it's one person or a few people, is also connected to who gets paid when that song does well, right? Not only who performed it. So there's just a different approach to like ownership, right? When you think about, again, so pointing back to Negro spirituals, you're not going to be able to attribute in that way, which also points to not that like, oh, we just forgot that, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so wrote this. You can also compose collectively. The song belongs to us, right? But that can only happen in the circumstance of a culture and community valuing collectiveness in that way. So, so you were asking, does it make it more powerful, or how does the music inspire that? But I think, again, the music is the people, and the people are the music. So it's there, and I'm not saying that music is not doing something functional. It absolutely does. And a thing that music can do is also group identity affirmation. So if anybody has ever looked at, for example, the practices of ring shout that happen not only here in the United States, you can look at versions of this all throughout, the Americas and the diaspora, but most people of African descent, if you have a lineage of people that were enslaved, the likelihood of you having some West African or Central African. So this is why I bring that up versus in other areas of the continent. So you will see elements of ring shout in samba de roda in Brazil. You're going to see elements of ring shout in spiritual practices like candomblé or santeria, but also in just non-spirit, just secular, what have you. Here in the United States, Congo Square, it's now historically preserved in New Orleans, and this would be a place too where enslaved people, because Louisiana, unlike many other states, is actually very influenced by Catholicism versus Protestant denominations, which more is more influenced in the rest of the United States. And so on a Sunday, this is where they would allow, and I'm gonna bring my rabbit ears back up, because it wasn't like people just. Anyway, it's still people are enslaved. Just want to say, but enslaved people were allowed to gather. And if you look at these archives, and there are some illustrations, and they are literally in a circle as we are, right? And what would happen in the circle? The chanting, singing, polyrhythmic, stomping, clamping, all those things, and you're going to move in a counterclockwise. Circle. So it's in the name, ring shout. And also we know too, because of Benjamin Latrobe was a architect, so he was fascinated, I guess, or interested in what was going on, and would take notes and draw. He was also, in his notes, you'll see something that looks, it's like a West African drum. You'll see something that looks like a stringed gourd instrument that was there, and that's not necessarily because people were able to carry those over with them. That means you must have had the skill set. Somebody had the skill set of being, so we brought over the drummers and the drum makers too. So going back to the collectivity of that all, this is also, we have this account also as one of the first African practices that we know that happens, that we have documentation that it happens here on American soil. And that, in fact, is an act of not one person singing or one person dancing. That is an act of gathering, right? And like I said, it happens all throughout the diaspora. So that points to a a part, something that was already there within the culture, a cultural value, and also clearly points to the significance of it as you are in a new world, be enslaved, right? How do you survive? So it must have also been important as an act of preservation. I would also assume resistance and how you survive in these brutal, harsh conditions and keep your own dignity and humanity and the care for yourself and others around you.
No, incredibly powerful. And this is so much of what you're saying, Asia, about resistance, about survival, and about how the act of so much cultural practice and where you're seeing those threads is about that. And I'm curious, as you think, Lizzy, about your response to this question, if you can thread in a little bit, because this conversation is just flying by, which makes me sad because I love it. I'm going to try to like kind of merge in some of these questions for time. That I see in this resistance also this thread of protest, and so the way in which in some we see in history this thread of resistance, right? And then, Lizzy, so much of your work and your focus has been in, Black freedom songs and in this, particular area. So I'm curious if you can thread in how protest, in addition to this collective practice, in so much of this is connected.
Um, I do want to come to this question of collectivity and just really underscore the importance of that value, which you find throughout Black Atlantic practice and culture and society, this valuing of the collective as opposed to the valuing of the individual, right? And relatedly, these ideas of ownership being different. The documentary about Dr. Regan, who I mentioned before, is called The Songs Are Free. Like that's the title of the songs are free, right? It also leads me just in thinking about the civil rights movement in particular, it leads me to also back to this question of history. What is it and how is it told? But to talk about the power of movement. And no matter what they teach us, I'll say us, no matter what they teach us in school, it is never one leader that makes change, right? And it is no accident that what we are taught about Dr. King, for example, please, no shade to Dr. King, please, to be very clear for history, I am not knocking Dr. King, but I am knocking a narrative that features and uplifts and archives the leadership of one person over the leaderful movement of regular people that change the actual world. That's right. Right? And that value of collectivity is seen there. And the threat of that to dominant society is seen in the way the history is then taught to us. Oh no, it was about this special person. Oh, I'm not special. I can't do that. As opposed to, it was about regular people sitting in circles having conversations and making decisions about what to do the next day and what not to do the next day and who's coming with me. You see what I'm saying? It's about collectivity, and that's what makes movements. And you see that in the songs, the way the songs were practiced. You see that embodied in the songs. Speaking of the songs of the freedom movements, but you can see it in all kind of places. But a story does come to mind from this conversation in 1959 at the Highlander Freedom School, which in Tennessee, which has since its founding in the 30s been an organizer's training hub, let's say. And so for many in the civil rights movement, it was a spot to come together, strategize, organize, refresh, replenish, do all the things, get some rest, be in the mountains. And there was always song, there was always theater, there was always dance. Arts was incorporated throughout. This is a story not often told of how Highlander functioned and continues to function. But anyway, there was a meeting of organizers in 1959 that was raided. And the accounts talk about, obviously, it being a terrifying moment. It was an integrated group. And they started singing. They started singing. They started singing We Shall Overcome. Before We Shall Overcome was We Shall Overcome that we know today, right? Before that, they started singing We Shall Overcome. They had been learning it in one of their organizing sessions as a song that might be useful in the movement. And little do they know, now here they come, and they start singing. And a teenage girl, a high school student from Alabama, improvised We Are Not Afraid. And the group, call and response, and the group responded, we are not, right? So what I'm talking about, the cultural practice is reflecting values and commitments of the movement. Am I making sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Yeah.
Yeah, that was a drop the mic moment, but I want to protect the mic. That was beautiful. It also what it makes me think in terms of this distinction between the individual and the collective, which is very. I talk about it a lot from the indigenous framework, right? It is also part of what is. The siloing I find that can often happen in how we tell certain demographics histories. It's like, oh, there's Black histories here, there's Indigenous histories here, there's Asian histories here, and part of that really it leaves out the almost by design in the way we talk about history, the intersectionality of it, the ways in which the movement has been fluid, the way in which everything about how we utilize song, how we utilize story to connect. And it's, I'll name from this individual collective that something that was so invisible to me even before coming here is that Boston has one of the highest populations of Afro-Indigenous people because Black and Indigenous people lived on these lands for longer than we've been a country. And that is just not in a lot of the 250th story, about who we've been and where we're going. And, to uplift, Bea, what you were saying about your work with Comfort Kitchen, like I was so excited that as part of the Black and Indigenous solidarity movement work that we had been doing that was supported by the Bar Foundation, we, we had been in relationship for some time, and I saw, and Gina Jameson, who is incredible, who is on the Arts Emerson team and shapes these point conversations, realized that what Bea was doing there was so connected to what we were trying to do with celebrating the intersections, both embodied and also between communities, all this connection that is between Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Massachusetts folks and African American folks in particular. So we were able to do an incredible meal at Comfort Kitchen that was celebrating with food and music, and it just felt like one community. And that was, and I think that speaks to it is not one individual, it is not one neat and tidy history. Even the way we think about, oh, I'm taking an elective, like in high school, I took an elective of African American history because Indigenous history wasn't offered that year. And I think about that and go, wow, like it's just, it's so interconnected, and I love celebrating that so much. So I'll ask, we're running a little late, but I want to ask, does anyone have a burning question that they want to provide this panel?
How do you feel about the creation of art or music being being an African American individual, but that's just like it? Like, does that build towards the story of like storytelling of our history of just being Black and creating, or like where does the deep importance of also the history storytelling come into play for each of you?
Juicy question.
Can you clarify a bit more?
Yeah.
Right?
So, for example, like if there was, I'll say me, for doing performance or sharing or creating a healing song, is it enough for it to just be, I'm Black and I am telling this story of this is peace, so here's my piece? Or is there this other side of it's important to tell, well, this is also the piece of where I come from, or am I the piece just by existing?
Okay, that's it. Okay. Well, add philosopher to your monikers. This is a deep meaning of life, existential questions. I love it. First of all, you're an artist, right? So, and I'm going to say that again. You're an artist. right? So it is, you are. Okay? And so what you're seeking to express or what you're trying to express at any moment, that's up to you, right? And so you might want a work that is, I want to include an account, of my people, of our history, or this particular thing, or what have you. You want to explore that, right? You might also, can you tell me your name again?
Alana.
Alana, and that's the art. And that's the art. You are the art. I don't think that as human beings we can ever separate ourselves from our time and place in this whatever you want, space time continuum, whatever you want to call it. But we can't separate ourselves from our context, right? You can explore more about your context because you did not, unless you could tell me, but I don't think you just spontaneously sprung into existence or grew fully formed out of your parents' head. You so you have a history and you carry a history whether you know it well or not. Now, and then lastly, I will say that there are some artists in terms of like art and identity. I think is your question is kind of getting at, because are we asking everybody to do that? Sometimes it is people in marginalized identities that their artwork is going to be interpreted or like this is so it's just automatically is this black art just is it not you get to determine that. But I think that there are some artists that are like this is I am a black artist and that is and going to be in every part in every asset of my expression that is not a separate. There are people that is like I'm an artist, that's it, yes, and I'm black, but I'm an artist. What I have noticed though, regardless of where anybody lands there, the fact of the matter, in terms of the way that our world and society works, at least here in the United States, is people, regardless of where they land on that, they do seem to have to confront it.
Yeah, that's real.
They confront it and then they decide what they do with it, but no one in these identities, and then one that we share, no one gets to bypass and not deal. So that's to me the reality of that. But you could decide, and I can't wait, Alana.
Hey, let's go.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Would others like to weigh in, or should I go to my? Yeah, go for it.
I think just very, very, very quickly that you said at one point, if I make something, is that enough? And I just want to be like, yes, girl.
Yes, it is.
Enough. Absolutely.
Word.
Whatever is coming is enough. And that your own all of us, our own interrogation, investigation about what it needs to be for me, for what purpose, in what moment, in what space, is ours to do, right? And these other things are coming from outside. When and how we choose to engage and interact with those other things is on us, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so yeah, it's enough. And we see you.
Hey, yes, we do.
Bea, are you good? Should I go to my? Or you want to? Okay, good, great. So I'll, because I'm going to keep going, but we'll go to our last question. And I think that Alana, you really kind of took us there without knowing it. Yeah. So these traditions have been carried forward across generations, as we've talked about. So what do you all see as the next chapter of that story?
Oh, I love that they're pointing at Alana. Yeah, I would say, I think the invitation tonight was we are history makers, right? And I think, wow, are we living through history? My goodness, right? Like it's became the meme of the moment, right? Like I'm tired of living through historical times. And so if that's the case, then I love this invitation from my fellow panelists of like, where are you contributing and what stories are you bringing forward and what are you choosing to tell about this moment or the one that just passed or how you're envisioning the future. So I think that's the invitation that I'm walking away with even for the work that I want to continue leading. And I think it feels extremely important now more than ever because so many of our mediums have expanded, right? So now we have all of these digital tools do with it what you will. They are here. And so, how are we also using that to tell the stories of our own future and of the present moment that we're living in?
Yeah, somebody let me know if I'm misremembering this, and I'm sorry if I am. But I'm thinking, I believe it was in Most Def's. Was it Black on Both Sides? But I'm just hearing this voice of, like, you're asking me where hip hop is going. Hip hop is going where the people are going, right? But I say that in general, and if I'm sorry if I misattributed that, but I think about this because of the larger idea, like, again, music is a cultural process, it's a social process. And so if we're looking at, like, well, what's next, what's going on, what have you, it's, the music is going where the people are going, the art is going where the people are going. And it's already happening. Sometimes we're not going to be able to, to the point of, like, what it means, or talking about meaning and significance, or analysis of it, or what have you. Sometimes we might need time and distance in those same way that you can probably look back at photographs and you didn't think you were dressing in a particular era of a style. You probably just thought you were wearing clothes. And maybe, like, clothes that you like. I could say this, like, from that, I can look back at the 90s pictures and I'm like, oh, I look very I thought I was wearing a cute outfit. I was, but I'm not thinking that I'm feeling very 90s today. But in 2026, I can look back and say, oh, this is absolutely all that was going on, and I could see in that what were some of the ideas, ideals, the values, the aesthetics, the expressions of that time, because it's all connected, So some of that we're going to need a little bit of hindsight on, but I think that, it's just, again, it's a social process, and it is never on pause. It is happening in the moment. We can maybe reflect on it later, but I just say, keep open and pay attention, because it's right by you, because we are also co-creating this moment together.
Beautiful. Lizzy, take us
Yeah.
home.
Okay.
No pressure. No pressure. We'll keep going if you're
Yeah,
like.
I just what's sitting on top for me right now is this, like, true belief that I have that when oppression clamps down, resistance rises up, and so often, I might say always, arts and culture is a part of that. As a part of the way we resist, as the part of the way we say, I am human. Right? This is my humanity. I'm gonna sing it, I'm gonna dance it, I'm gonna paint it, I'm gonna wear a fly outfit about it, whatever the case may be, right? It's that these cultural practices that we're talking about is our humanity singing and blaring itself through the opposition, through the stories that try to tell us we are less than, right? And we're like, oh, no, because I got a song. I got a song to sing, right? And so I think my invitation to folks would be to take that stuff seriously.
Yes.
Right? Like, think about that recipe you have from your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother. Take it seriously. Think about that lullaby you sing to your child because someone sang it to you. Think about the last time you sang with other people, danced with other people, cooked with other people, and take it seriously. That's our humanity, right? That's where it begins. I really believe that.
And talk to your elders while they're still here. Ask them questions. Ask them their stories. Now, sometimes they don't want to talk about it, but but they will. But whatever they are willing to share, make sure that while they're here, you get that story.
Well, I have to say, just thank you for the incredible gift of the three of you. I mean, this for me, I'll just even say personally, has been a real incredible medicine for this moment. And the weaving that all of you are doing in your various practices, it's really beautiful and such a gift to know you're in Boston, you're on these lands, doing this, and in the way you show up, with people, how you're connecting, and just your generosity of spirit and expertise tonight is it's really infectious. So just thank you all so much.